Lillian Stein. She will talk to us about research that she's been doing among ministers over the past couple of months. Very exciting, very creative work, and we really look forward to hearing from you, Marilyn. And then thirdly, we will listen to Dr. Pieter van der Walt. He will speak on research that they've conducted with congregations and with ministers. So that will also give us a better insight on what is happening at the moment. But before we start, and before I hand over to our three speakers, I just want to rewind a little bit and recap just in a few sentences what we did at the end of last year. Now, first of all, you can see in the chat box there is the link, the YouTube link. If you missed out last time, you can catch up on YouTube and see what the same three speakers said last time. Now, firstly, in the first session, Etienne spoke about the brain-body system, and he helped us to better understand what really happens to us and our bodies when we have fatigue. I can recall, Etienne, you telling us that energy is finite, and you also explained, you said actually so much, and it's such ground-laying work that you did, but also about a brain-body implosion that can happen. So just to give you a faint idea of the kind of things that Etienne talked about. Marilyn has been doing a lot of research since the start of the COVID pandemic. And last time she told us about previous research that she did in 2020 in homiletics on preaching. And she explained to us how did the ministers preach on the topic of COVID and how did that preaching also change in the course of the year. It's very insightful for us to better understand also our thinking in that way. And then thirdly, Peter, in line with what he will be doing tonight, shared with us research that they did in congregations during COVID. And he told us that the congregations were, and Peter, I believe they still are, very, very compassionate. The congregations are compassionate, and that is also one of the reasons why congregations and ministers experience a lot of fatigue. So that's just a brief recap of the end of last year and our first webinar. And tonight I will give each speaker the opportunity to speak for between 10 and 15 minutes. But before they start, I've just got here one question that I would like to post in the chat box. I'm just getting the question quickly. And I want to ask you to, as they speak, please answer that question. What is the one thing that is the toughest for you in these days? They can continue with their sessions. You can answer the question between Bridget and myself. We will try our best to capture what you're saying. You're also very welcome to post other questions there for the speakers. And right in the end, they can also respond to what you say there and also try to answer some of the questions. Let me go right over to our first speaker tonight. That is Dr. Etienne van der Walt. He is a neurologist and also CEO of Neurozone, a neuroscience and analytic company who uses a dynamic behavioral code to enhance resilience in individuals, teams, and organizations. And Etienne's theme tonight is the complexity of our context, ecology of COVID-19. So Etienne, thanks so much once again, and we listen to you.
Thanks, Gus. It's great to be here. Can you hear me properly? All good. Thank you.
I can.
100%. I actually want to share a screen with you in a minute or so, and really want to speak to the brain. So I'm going to sort of hide away behind what I know best, and that is really the brain-body system, the physiology, and actually speak to the psychoneurobiology of the brain-body system. So Maybe for those of you who've been here with us in the first webinar, I will repeat a few things because it is so important. I think just to lay that foundation again for us to understand. So from a brain-body system perspective, as we said before, it's fairly easy and tangible to understand that there's one thing that the brain-body system really want to achieve. Our brain-body systems, regardless of the ecosystem and the environment, want to achieve one thing, and then it is happy. And that is to be in a baseline relaxed physiological state. So a baseline relaxed physiological state means that you and I are in a state where our blood pressure is low, our heart rate is low, and where we are in a state where metabolism is optimized, and also where maintenance is optimal. It effectively means that you and I should only go out of this baseline optimal maintenance state when we are challenged by threats or potential rewards that we want to maximize. And this can happen any time of the day, continuously. And of course, at night too, because at night we have to solve our most complex problems. So the idea is that we continuously move out of the baseline relaxed physiological state to overcome the challenge. And once we overcame the challenge, we have to move into that baseline relaxed physiological state. And this baseline relaxed physiological state, as we said, is a maintaining system that also ensures that you and I do not develop chronic illness. That's where we remove the cancer cells that we built up throughout the day. We remove the neurodegenerative cells that we built throughout the day at night. There's a lot that's happening in this state that needs to happen, and if it doesn't happen, we've got trouble. And so every time you and I move out of a baseline relaxed physiological state, we have to do something very specifically. And it means that we have to overcome a challenge, and we need to know that we are going to overcome this challenge. Chronic stress is simply when you and I have moved out of the baseline relaxed physiological state and we simply cannot return to that baseline relaxed physiological state. It means that unconsciously we perceive the threat to be too big, or the stressor is too strong, or it's something that's just not going away. We simply cannot solve the problem. Which then means that you and I are in a wake state and in a sleeping state will actually go into this state of a so-called sympathetic drive, and we will be in a fight-flight type of mode, but at a low rate. It doesn't even have to be a very anxious state. We'll be anxious and we sort of psyched up and we're going to play a rugby game or something, or we're going to have to overcome a challenge. You're actually in a chronic stress state. It's just a low state of being out of that state, the baseline relaxed physiological state. Now, what we've seen in COVID is that certain behaviors that are predictors of ensuring that we have got enough resilience to overcome the challenges that come our way have changed significantly. So the ecosystem has effectively changed so rapidly and so significantly globally that you and I require a whole set of new behaviors to still be able to build that resilience so that we can actually overcome the challenges and so we can continuously move back into a baseline relaxed physiological state. So that is the way it's sort of set up. And I actually want to just share one more thought with you. If I have, Cas, how many minutes do I have left? Maybe 2, 3? I can't hear you, Cas.
You've got more minutes left.
Fantastic.
At least 7.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, well, let me share this with you then. I'm going to share this. Can you see the screen that we've got here? See if I can take that away. I can probably take the whiteboard away. And now I want to share. Now, where's that now? Can everybody see the brain in your screen now?
No.
Nope. I'm having the same trouble that I've had before. I simply can't get to share screen. You can't see my screen.
No.
Etienne, if you can mail it to me, I'll share it again, like last time.
No, I will, Peter. But I tell you what, I'll share this with you. What I'm going to do, I'm going to take a picture of this. I'm going to send this to you. So I'm going to work without this. I wanted to show you a nice brain model, but simply we can't mail the model. So let me just continue speaking to it.
Okay.
What has happened that is in addition to what since we were here the previous time, is we had a holiday. And we have a holiday, actually a period of rest. And of course, family time and rest on a yearly basis, annually. Deep down in the brain, in the center of the brain, is a very small structure, which is called the hypothalamus. And you might have heard of it, but let me just explain. The hypothalamus is actually situated on top of the brain stem. It's one of the most primitive parts of the brain. And the hypothalamus is part of the brain stem, but it's also part of this emotional limbic system. The hypothalamus is connected to all the senses that come in through the external environment, and it's connected to all the information that is in the internal environment. So it's the eye turned inward, and it receives information from the external environment. It's in the center of the brain. And in there, for example, there's a small set of brain cells called, forget about the name. It's actually 40,000 little neurons that are the brain cells that are structured together that actually just look at light and darkness. And it continuously receives light and darkness. And when it receives enough light, it wakes us up. And if it receives enough darkness, it will put us to sleep for long enough. So this is just an example of how that hypothalamus works through rhythms and cycles. Attached to that hypothalamus, that structure in your brain, is a gland that's called the pituitary gland, the hypophyse. And it actually, that structure regulates the whole system through rhythms and cycles. The monthly, for example, the menstrual hormones that women secrete is driven through that process. Cortisol that you and I secrete on a daily basis that has a very much up and down circadian rhythm, that's a day-night cycle, is secreted by that system. There are many other rhythms and cycles in the hypothalamus that structure picks up. That is bizarre. I mean, I've seen in our practice, we've seen something called cluster headaches. Cluster headaches is something that actually comes either every year or maybe every 5 years or every 10 years or sometimes even after 30 years. A patient will tell you, I've had this set of headaches, and they come exactly the same time at night, 11 o'clock at night, for example, for 2 weeks, and then it's gone. And then 30 years later, it comes again. We know now that it's in this hypothalamus structure. There are rhythms and cycles that go out of sync. And then this is the way the system fires again. It fires through the headaches, and then you're going back into sync, and then the whole system is in synchronicity with the universe again and the universe of life. Sound quite mystic, but it's physiology. And so the idea that you and I cycle through rhythms and cycles which are essential for us should not be underestimated. And what happened this year, I'm sure you can ask yourself, did you really have the rest? Did you really cycle through the same cycles? Did you have the similar kind of restfulness and the similar kind of bonding and belonging that you established in your social safety environment? Or was it so disrupted by COVID and everything else, as with many, many families, and maybe most families in the world, especially in South Africa, having that particular wave exactly at that time? Can you see what kind of physiology takes place and what kind of physiological derangements we've seen, which in the ecosystem and the environment continuously challenges the system and says, we need a different set of behaviors that we need to look after very carefully to ensure that we are resilient enough to overcome the challenges and not to burn out through chronic stress. And compassion fatigue and chronic stress, very much similar, eventually lead to a burnout or a fatigueness that means that your energy, which is finite, has been has been depleted. I can either show you what we've learned, a list of behaviors now, or we can do it a bit later, Cas, when we get to the more practical aspects of it.
Okay. Etienne, that was very insightful. Maybe we do that later when we take a second round. Excellent.
100%.
No, thanks so much. I see the comments are coming into the question that we posted. It's very helpful. I think maybe you can also have a look, the three of you, on what they're saying. Etienne, you already made talking about time and rhythms, biological rhythms, and I want to later speak to you about liturgical rhythms and in a time like this, and how we can get that in sync, because that's very important and can maybe be helpful. But for now, we're first going to listen to the youth minister of Saldanha, also PhD student, writer who writes for different publications, and who's done a very exciting and creative research project over the past months. That's Reverend Marilyn Stein, but she can tell you all about this project. So Marilyn, over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Gus. So it's wonderful to be here and share with you some of the research I did at the end of last year. We did the compassion fatigue first webinar, and then the question came to mind, but what helps and what helped ministers to cope in 2020? And from this question, we did some research that we call portraiture. Now, portraiture is where you do research, you do interviews, and you create a portrait of somebody and their experience. So I traveled around the Western Cape Synod and spoke to about 50 ministers and asked them some questions I'm going to share now. And then I hope that I have better luck than Etienne. I believe you can see my screen now. If that is not the case, just inform me.
Yes,
please.
we see.
Great. So now I just need to, it needs to do what I'm telling it to do. That's the next challenge. So it's just, sorry, it doesn't want to go to the next slide. So it's the lovely share screen. Let's just try that again. So what we did is we spoke to 50 ministers and we asked them the same questions, each of them. We asked 4 questions. There we go. Tell me about your experience of 2020. What helped you to cope? What did Corona give you? Not Corona. A few people asked me about that, but in the sense of what gifts did Corona give you? And what happened in your theology? And so when I told people that we're doing this research, a lot of people asked me, and what are the experiences of ministers in 2020? How did they cope? And I think the first thing, before I share the rest of the information, is there's no unified picture. Not everybody struggled. Not everybody had a good time. Not everybody coped the same way. And I think that, well, at least for me as a minister, it gives me a great sense of relief to know there's no one way that this should be handled or that others handled it. It's unique. What happened is that with each story, I started to identify a unique lens through which you could understand the person's story. In a way, it is to show that each story is unique. And so I'll share the lenses with you now. But in between these lenses, there were family traits, and in the stories as well. So for instance, something I'm not going to share is that most people used WhatsApp to distribute sermons and thus more. You'll see the family traits now. I identified 7 family traits. But before I show it, I just want to make a quick remark. This is 2020 data. In the meantime, we had our second wave, we had a vacation. And so I am aware that the situation has changed for not only the people listening here today, but also to the people who participated in the study. And so I really hope that some of the things that they shared can help us today. So there are a few family traits, as I said. And the first was ministers and their vulnerability. Now, each of the words there, anger, vulnerability, authenticity, live, desert, and love, was a lens. Each of them represents a story of somebody. And I just want to start here because I think it's important to say that as we go through this and as we experience compassion fatigue, we are confronted by our own vulnerability, which, by the little I understand of the topic, can be a frightening thing. But it can also be a liberating thing. And so I think that I just like to make a short remark on each of those. And the one is that the person who talked about anger talked about the importance of us allowing all the emotions into our sphere. So our sphere of experience, if you can put it that way. So we often, engage with the positive emotions. We get the message that we should only be happy, or we should push through and only experience the positive emotions. But the wisdom of this research participant was really to say, but the anger that we feel can be liberating in itself, and also to go to the Bible and look at anger passages, especially in the Psalms, and to work through those as a way of dealing with our compassion fatigue that can also involve some anger. Vulnerability, I see somebody posted about their challenge regarding the funerals in the community and how tired they are with regards to that. And there's this lovely story of a minister in a community where they had to do so many funerals. So they had to do about 50 within those first 6 months of the ministry in the congregation. And then they had to do large funerals of families in the COVID time. And the way that they experienced how vulnerability as shared amongst the community can be so helpful. So I think the thing I take away from that story is that vulnerability is not to be dealt with alone. It's something to be shared with our communities. The story, later we will make the stories available, but in this specific story, it's how the minister supported others in their vulnerability. And then when his wife got diagnosed with cancer, how the community supported him in his vulnerability. And I think that was a source of strength for that community. Authenticity, we need to be more honest. So many people spoke about mental health issues. Some of them wanted to remain anonymous. And there's just this big stigma still, and we need to talk about the stigma of mental health in the church. We need to talk about the theology of mental health, and not only amongst ministers or church leaders. We have to talk about a theology of mental health within our congregations as well. We're not the only ones struggling. Live is just the idea that somebody said, but our purpose here is to flourish. It's more than survival. How do we flourish in a survival state? The desert was a profound interview where I asked the minister, how are you coping in this time? And he stopped, he looked at me and he said, I'm not. And that was the end of that question. And his experience that he is in a desert, but that God is still providing. And then love, to know that we are here not only for a purpose, we're not only here to be ministers, we're here because God loves us, but also so that we can love life. I spend some time on this topic because I think it's important to know we're not the only ones feeling these things. We're not the only ones feeling compassion fatigue. And I hope that in this vulnerability, we can experience a space where we can say, okay, me too. This is familiar and this is safe for me to feel. And I really think that should be the starting point of whatever we do regarding compassion fatigue. Then ministers in their community, just to say that, so many people struggled with the lack of contact, not only within those first 5 weeks, but even still people miss physical contact, people miss being restricted in their contact with their loved ones. I spoke to, if I have to tell you how many times I heard the line, I'm an introvert, but I miss people. Missing contact, feeling isolated is not limited to extroverts. And we have to think about the way we work with this. Collaboration was one of the themes that it came forth very strongly, that the more you collaborate, the better it is for your rhythm, the better you cope. And it's collaboration within the community, it's collaboration with your church council, it's collaboration to say between organizations, so that the relief projects that you have do not only fall on yourself. So we need to explore how we can make the load lighter. The know is somebody who said that it's easy to talk about relationships, but to really know your community changes how you work. And I thought that was just an important remark to make. And then embrace, to say, but we need also to remember in this time that we can embrace the diversity around us and use that. And I think that for me, it links with collaboration, to work together more within the diversity of skills that we have. Then ministers and their skills and knowledge. I'm not going to go too much into this, but basically many ministers coped by seeing how they were stretched, by discovering so much more of God and of themselves, and to celebrate that. I think that if we have compassion fatigue, to maybe look back and say, what did I achieve? What did I learn? What skills did I develop? And to celebrate what we do have. That's part of the question of what did Corona give you? And then the prioritize was a very wonderful interview that I had with somebody, and I asked them what do they think should their lanes be, and they had this Afrikaans slogan. They said, "Moenie kompeteer, prioritiseer." Do not now my English broke in 1 second. Do not compete. Thank you. Do not compete with one another, but prioritize what is important, what is not. And one of the things that the person said here that I think is so applicable is that we tend to look at larger congregations with more resources, and part of our fatigue comes from the comparing ourselves with others and saying, but I can't do that, or trying to keep up, asking ourselves, am I doing enough? This person said that sometimes they even wonder whether what they're doing isn't already enough for their congregation. Does their congregation really need all this extra? So I think to prioritize and say what's really important in this time, because you can't do everything. And yet we feel we have to. And I think it goes back to the collaboration point as well. Ministers and their faith, there was an awareness of God, the discipline, establishing a rhythm, if I can link with Etienne there, establishing a rhythm, and how our faith disciplines also help to stabilize us and provide us with sustenance through the process. And then presence, I wanted to talk about specifically. In more than 80% of the interviews, when I asked what happened to your theology, people said, I was reminded anew, or something like that, about the presence of God. So we need to think about, what does God's presence really mean? And how can that help us when we have compassion fatigue, or when others can no longer continue with the road? And then calling, just a short remark there. I think it's important to know that some ministers also experience that they found a calling outside of the ministry, and that's okay. That God has called them not only to do this, but that God calls them to do different things at different times. And some people thrived in the calling of being a minister, and some people thrived in realizing that they can also do other things. And I think that was a significant moment for me in the interviews. And then vision, optimism, forecasting. Forecasting is the ability to look what is on the other side and to be able to work towards something. Now, we can't plan, and yet we have to find something to work towards, because that is what gives us drive. And sight is somebody who linked eschatology and said the way we see the future, the way we see God's work and the fulfillment thereof will change how we do things now. And I think there are some excellent remarks, but unfortunately, I don't have the time to relay all of it now. And then minister and the life rhythms. And I think, Etienne, this links up so much with what you said. So many ministers said that their life rhythms changed, either for the better or for the worse. But what I saw was a questioning, and you can see how many people touched on this topic, a questioning of why do we run the pace we do? And is it productive? Is it helpful? And when Etienne speaks about rest, you know, some of the people talked about their fatigue, and then they say, and then I went away for a week, but I kept on doing this and I kept on doing this, and I did a retreat for 3 days and it didn't help at all. If you want to rest, from the stories I've listened to, it's fooling yourself if you don't rest completely, and it will not help compassion fatigue. And I know the context is so difficult because you have to preach and things have to happen and people can't come in and help you. But we have to talk. I've heard stories where people talk to their church council and said, I can't anymore. And where they said, okay, we just break, we stop. The congregation stops for 2 weeks so that you can just, go on, and that's okay. To say that we have enough, not only we are enough, we do enough, we have enough, and to return to the basics of what is important. One of the things is that we're doing the same things perhaps, or a bit less, but everything takes more time, and that exhausts people. So in the beginning, a lot of people talked about how they sent out things every day and the pace they created for themselves. And then Corona just kept on rolling and rolling and rolling, and they couldn't keep up the pace. So I think it's important to ask ourselves, what pace am I running? Why? And what can I do about it? Not only in COVID times, but also under normal circumstances. Some people felt that Corona helped them because they slowed down finally. So yeah, just to think about that. What can we take home? We have to start with compassion for ourselves and with others. People are struggling, and it's okay. We have to create spaces of vulnerability. And I think we have to move away from the idea that we are the givers of answers. I know that's a trap I fall in. But just to have compassion and just say, well, I wanted to swear now, not a big swear word, it's a tiny one, but just to say, I struggle as well. And then to have sensitivity for contributing factors such as the drought in some areas, how that contributes to compassion fatigue, how racism in areas contributes to compassion fatigue, how a divorce or your own your own illness, perhaps you had Corona, somebody mentioned it, how that may also affect it, and to be sensitive to the impact thereof and then say stop. Something that I did not mention is many of the people who coped well mentioned the things that Etienne will probably mention later. They ran, they had rhythms, exercised regularly, ate healthily, focused on hobbies. So if you have the energy to do that, please do that. And then I already remarked on mental health. Just a final, I think I'm almost done with my time, just a final remark. I think if you have compassion fatigue, and I had to say something from the stories that I listened to, it would be this: search for your own vulnerability and thrive in it. See how you can create a community within your congregation, your private life. See how you can create communities in alternative ways to support yourself. Celebrate the skills and knowledge that you do have. In a time where we feel incompetent, it's important to celebrate what we have. Think anew about your faith and calling. Spend some time with it. It really was a great source of strength for so many people. Sight, keep looking forward. Find ways of forecasting, finding hope. Even if you plan something that won't happen, perhaps just planning it. Already I heard some research, maybe I'm wrong, that said that just planning something, even if you know it's not necessarily going to happen as you planned it, already helps the brain. Perhaps I'm lying. If I am, I'm very sorry. And then reevaluate your life rhythms. And I think that's so important, not only your rhythm within your own life, but I think congregations can also reevaluate the rhythms they have. So I'm just ending off with this summary of all the lenses that people had, and I hope really that some of them can talk to you. Maybe one or two of these can help you just trigger something to think, but what can help me cope in this time? Because these things in front of you helped others.
Marilyn, that was very insightful. It was actually already also very comforting for us to listen to. And it's wonderful the way in which it links up with what Etienne said earlier. So I'm already looking forward to conversation later. It also links well with the comments that's coming in. So thanks so much for that. We're going to Pieter, Dr. Pieter van der Walt, our last speaker. He's Minister specially tasked with coordinating the research network of the Western Cape Synod of the Dutch Reformed Church, also involved in Kerkspeel, the church mirror research. Peter and his team have been working for the past months, plural, on research that can also help us with this conversation. And his topic tonight is research from a minister's panel. What can we do? So, Peter, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. I was really blown away by Etienne and Marlene now, and I think I'm going to run quickly through what we discovered in the previous pastors panel, the second one that we did last year, that was in mid-November. And then I'm going to put a very fresh piece of research on the table. This afternoon, I had a session with a pastor in the far north, in a big town in the far north, and I decided to make that the interview and use it for tonight. And it is absolutely amazing to me to see how it dovetails with what is developing here tonight. In the previous webinar, I put on the table the first pastors panel that was in the 10th week of lockdown. People were still very optimistic, I think. People were saying they were coping very well. It was all new and even exciting and so on. And it was not easy, but the fatigue was not there as it is now. We could already see it in mid-November. And I agree with Etienne that it's become worse. So I just gave this little heading: what will happen to you if you experience the following in less than a year? If you firstly become a regular vidcast performer. I'm not going to say anything more about that. A lot of people complain about screen fatigue. Also in the pastors panel that came out. You are sent to a suffering community. 92% of pastors once again reported that their congregations are involved in the communities in relief work. That impacts on pastors, but not only on pastors, also on a lot of leaders in congregations and volunteers. And we see that, we experience that. A lot of our people in our congregations last year developed deeper relationships with people amongst the poorest of the poor, and they were exposed to the real hardship in South Africa, and that also had an impact. Then you become a frontline worker, and our pastors are really frontline workers. Almost all of the pastors reported that they made house visits in cases of emergencies. So they went to people in times of emergencies. They exposed themselves. They made use of the telephone mostly for normal pastoral work, but they were also frontline workers. A lot of comments were about the funerals. One pastor who lives close by had more than 20 funerals COVID-related already. My closest colleague had 7 funerals in 2 weeks now, of most of them COVID-related, and I can see what it does. We are conducting a short another survey now with the URCSA to find out how the rates of funerals, how it was in the first wave and in the second wave, to compare that. I think as it's part of our culture to be deeply involved with people who are hungry, it is also part of our denominational culture, as it is with URCSA and also other denominations, that we look after our elderly, we care for them. It's part of the main task of congregations, is to care for the elderly. So pastors couldn't visit that lonely elderly person who had a time of isolation because of COVID, and that also impacted. This was something that a lot of the pastors mentioned in an open question, so they were not prompted about this, but they mentioned it spontaneously. So yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty if and when, especially younger members, will return physically to church. So a lot of data shows that. Also in the pastors panel, we saw that at mid-October, that was between the two waves, 45% of pre-COVID attendance, worship attendance, was attained. So there's a lot of uncertainty that also impacts us. Then it was also mentioned the thing about the questions. In the 10th week, the response was that people do not have much questions about God and about faith in these times. There was conspiracy theories and so on, but not really deep faith questions, but that changed. And we are interpretive guides in our communities, so we have to deal with that. And in a time where everybody is fatigued and you have your own fatigue and suffering, it becomes more difficult to handle these intense and difficult questions about faith and God. So also the conspiracy theories there, all these challenges. So what will happen to you if you experience this in less than a year? And we could continue with this list. Also, when looking at the pastors panel, it could be an extensive list. Now the story, I want to conclude with this little, also maybe, so it's like I would love to be able to write a portraiture of this Madeleine. It looks so interesting, but this is a town, Dominee, in the far north, big town. And what came out in his story, a lot of stories that he told of this time, is his deep concern about the impact of digital church on the connections between people in person, on koinonia. The uncertainty in himself, and also the difficulty in dealing pastorally with people who really suffers. There's a question in his own congregation: why did a member of 86 years old survive COVID? A young member, vibrant young man of 32 died of COVID. Those type of things, that's really existential, financial loss and so forth. So that was the one side. On the other hand, he said that the Lord just revealed some things to us, and that encouraged us and that energized us in town. Congregations, at least 5, 6 congregations in our town took hands. They came closer towards each other. We started to network with other organizations in the community, and we shared resources. Marlene referred to that, to help the community. So something new is developing, and we are moving from competition to collaboration, as you put it. It also refers back to Marlene's portraits. And that energized them tremendously. So he says, previously we would talk of my congregation. Now it's our calling. And there are seeds of a beautiful and more flourishing future, when congregations can, even if they are not as financially as strong as previously and so forth, or as big in numbers, but when they work together, when they collaborate, when we are not standing alone, some wonderful things can happen in the congregation. That everything has to do with calling. That's the little portrait of the town Dominee of this afternoon, and it reminded me of this picture, and I want to conclude with that. This is the drawing of the kannidood, or the so-called partridge breast aloe, because of that beautiful little white spots on its leaves. It's a robust plant. It is adapted to arid conditions, and you will very often find them not standing alone, but in groups. that's all for now. Gus, thank you.
Peter, thanks so much. What a beautiful way to conclude the third contribution. I mean, you talk about fatigue, you talk about challenges, but I mean, in all of that, you and the ministers that you spoke to look deeper, and there's also a lot of hope. There's also light in all of this. Thank you so much. And also between the three of you, there's really also in the different approaches, there's some triangulation happening here, also with the chat box, because we're getting some data and we can compare, and there are definitely very interesting trends and comparable themes coming out tonight. So I just want to share with everybody, I'll do it very briefly, on the first question, the toughest thing that you're dealing with at the moment. I'm going to summarize the ones that I picked up here, and then I'm going to post another question. And then I'm going to give the panelists a chance to each, just in a couple of minutes. You can put it like this, you can do whatever you want to. You can share a bit more, you can reflect on what one of your colleagues said, you can reflect on the chat box, whatsoever. So you will each get another brief round now. But we heard there in the chat box about loss and help after loss. The question, am I doing enough? How tough it is to listen to people who are suffering and people who are depressed. Again, listening to pain, to give empathy. Also when I'm ill myself. So the listening, it's tough listening that we hear here. So much tasks are now falling on me. And I know so many ministers and other people also get a lot of extra new things that they all of a sudden have to do. To stay friendly and calm, especially when you work with many elderly people, to deal with a second and a third wave and not knowing what is to come. I mean, that now not knowing is a big question. To just get up in the morning and smile, that's tough. Preaching to a screen, and they were also the theme of the absence of other bodies, of other people, the connection. And the home visits are now only emergency related. I think a lot of people can actually relate to what the people who are participating tonight wrote there. Thanks so much for
Gus, you muted.
I'm muted.
You said thanks so much for, and that was it.
Okay.
You're back.
You said thanks so much for, and then you went mute.
Okay. Thanks so much for your comments. And I just posted a second question that you can work on, all the people who are participating tonight, whilst I hand over again to the panelists. I hope you can hear me at the moment. So Etienne, you still wanted to share a bit more.
Gus, thanks. It seems that I'm going to not share anything on the screen with you tonight, but that's fine. I think what really struck me is that almost everything seemed to be tough. I mean, there's such a variety of things. You from getting up and smiling in the morning, to working on the screen, to doing what ministers do. And of course, I'm not a minister. I have got some insight as a congregationist, but that's everything seems to be tougher. And I think that for me, that's quite striking. I think that what I would like to still share with you, and just to add to this, the context again, is that basically, and I'm going to actually just emphasize the idea that energy is finite again. Just for a moment, remember that we're still animals grazing in the field, right? So we've got a body that needs to burn fuel, and that fuel needs to provide energy. And just one little short note on that again. Remember, we've got two pipes. The one takes in the fuel in the form of food, and it takes it through the one pipe into the stomach, and then it gets absorbed through a nice long pipe. And the other pipe inhales the oxygen that goes through the lungs into your system, and it's carried by the blood to the cells, and there it meets everything that you took, well, everything, the nutrients that you actually took up in the other pipe. And when they meet, there's a fantastic explosion. And that explosion is combustion. And it's basically exactly the same as oxygen that is added to your wood on a fire. Oxygen that's added to to fuel in your car. It's combustion. And the result of that combustion process, the end products are threefold. One is water, the other one is carbon dioxide, which you exhale again. And the water, of course, we all know where that goes. And then there's energy. And the energy is released in the form of heat. That's why we have body temperatures. And the rest of the energy is stored for utilization. And the brain is a huge utilizer of energy. In fact, the brain is constitute 2% of the body mass, and utilizes 20% of the energy that's available that we combust, and that is at a baseline state. So the idea that energy is finite must be clear, right? I mean, you can't have more energy than what you produce. If you have more energy available, you store it in fat. That's why we get fat. So the idea that energy is finite is a critical component. It means that self-leadership, therefore, is so critical. It means that you have to use that finite energy for high yield. Now, what happens is that what is amazing is that in fatigue, it just says in its own words, fatigue means that my energy is gone. I'm drained. I don't have energy. And so even though I actually make energy, the energy is used for something else. And it is indeed. It means that there's a leak. So we've seen now with looking at the way the brain-body system works, that there's a leak. There's either a leak of energy, or there are things that block energy, and then there are those things that boost energy. And I just want to just mention that, and then I'm going to hand back to you, Cas. When you think about energy in terms of leakers and blockers and boosters, the leaker is chronic stress, compassion fatigue, burnout. Those are examples of a leak. You've got to fix that leak, and the way to, the beautiful thing though, because everything affects everything, is that you can fix the leak by actually working on the boosters. Well, I'll get that in a second. The other one are blockers, and the blockers are addictions, destructive habits, and negative intrusive thought patterns. It's been well shown that it reduces the amount of reward dopamine in our brains that we actually have to anticipate to actually provide the energy for whatever we need to do. Can you see how compassion fatigue and how everything else that becomes negative starts to continue to block the energy? So the boosters are so critical. And the boosters are what we call high performance energy boosters. And they are the optimism, gratitude, enthusiasm, humor, and curiosity. Those are the 5 that's been studied to be more profound than, for example, sense of beauty, sense of splendor, and all these other beautiful emotions. So those 5, I'm going to repeat them again. Optimism, the sense of belief that this too shall pass, and we will not pass with it. And the next one, of course, gratitude. And I think that was so well mentioned in both by Peter and by Marlene. The gratitude, it's so important. Curiosity, humor, and enthusiasm. They are the boosters of the system. So leaks, block, remember those blockers. And so that's how you maximize the energy again, that now spiral upwards again, to ensure that we maximize the energy usage. And I think that's what I can, from a physiological perspective, maybe can contribute to.
No, once again, it helps a lot to understand what we're experiencing much better. The leaks and the blocks, it makes much sense to me. Could you maybe type those 5 things in the chat box? Then it will be great if you can do that we can see it and I can remember it as well. Marlene, would you like to add?
I think if I have to think of 3 main things, it's to be vulnerable and authentic, I think the time has passed where we cannot do that. I think, and I know that it can be tough, and I know that I've experienced that congregants call you on it when you're vulnerable, but I think to continue doing that with a sense of courage is important. I think to take a break. Many of the stories that I heard said, I took a small break and then I broke down completely. If you're not going to take a break now, you're going to take it at some point, but you're in control now still, perhaps, about when and how you take it. So if at all possible, do everything you can to take the break before it's too late, or before you need a longer break, if I can put it that way. And then the other thing is tell your story. It was interesting that some of the interviewees experienced a form of relief, safety, being able to just say, but this is where I am. And so if you do not have a space to tell your story already, please create a space, go to somebody and reflect. Reflect on those 4 questions for yourself. You know, what was your experience of Corona? What did Corona give you? What helped you cope? And what happened in your theology? And perhaps that reflection can also move you forwards. And all the best.
Marilyn, I take it what you're suggesting now to talk about it, to talk to somebody about it. You also experienced that with the people that you spoke to, and they also told you this. It's wonderful to speak to you, and to have somebody a bit neutral like you to speak to. So we should actively look for Marilyns and actually speak to her. That's what you're saying. That's great.
I wouldn't put it that way, but you're sure. Let's go with it.
No, not everybody's speaking to you, but in general, it's wonderful advice that you're giving us. Yeah. No, great. Peter.
Gus, yes, I listened to Etienne now, and I was thinking about that leak or leaks that he is referring to. And it came to my mind that I don't think we really know how to rest for that leaks to heal and for our energy to return. Rest that is more than sleep or more than a holiday or a break or whatever, but the deep rest, spiritual rest also that we need. And I wondered if I could ask you, Cas, maybe for just a short comment or an idea about rest, real spiritual rest. That also, I think, I sense that it has to do with the rhythms that you were referring to and so forth. But I don't think in our culture that we really know how to rest. I would love to hear what your ideas about that are.
Peter, I had the privilege to join Frederik, who's also with us, and some other people yesterday at Stellenbosch with Marie, Brits, and some others. And they shared quite a lot on becoming quiet. It was the whole day was about, the talk was about faith formation. But what came out there was also faith formation. And I think we shouldn't underestimate how pandemic experiences are busy with faith formation in us, whether we want to know it or not, and how those processes are always anchored in practices and loads of different practices. And all of you spoke tonight about practices. Also in the chat box, we hear that. And for me, you asked now about rest. And rest is more about going on a holiday. I mean, we've all heard tonight, we've all taken off, but very few people really feel rested. But there's definitely some wisdom in the old ancient wisdom of the rhythms of life, the biological rhythms that Etienne spoke about, that must get in sync with other rhythms. I think the biggest gift that we have, I mean, the Sunday, the Sabbath day, is the day of the resurrection. And I think some of the resurrection from compassion fatigue can come from rediscovering Sunday, not as a day where you should not work and rest, but as a day of reclaiming the rhythms, starting there. Making a point of 9 o'clock as we used to, we will do it again, even if it's online, even if it's with a screen. And from there, almost as a kind of an epicentrum, you know, the Sunday morning rhythm. From there, you can also create different rhythms in the course of the week. The rhythm of the table, you know, in your house, even if you're staying alone, if you're with a family, but there are many different rhythms that you can connect. And there's a lot of, how shall I call it? Comfort to be found in that. I always tell the students, it's interesting, if you're in a household, okay, and say we're a family of 5, and we had supper earlier tonight, and we went to the table and we all knew where we're going to sit. We didn't have a long discussion on, okay, where will I sit tonight and where will you sit tonight? The same in a class when we get the students in. They come and they sit in the seats where they always sit. Now, sometimes we complain in church when the Van der Merwes don't want to move out of their pew, and they sit where the Van der Merwes have been sitting for a century. But there's also something beautiful in that. I mean, they come to rest in a rhythm, and that rhythm is in a certain space. It's in a certain time. And I think, I don't have the answer. I really don't. But I think especially now that we've been robbed of our rhythms, I mean, it's taken away. We've got the online services, but I can choose whether I want to tune into Marilyn or not. I can even stop and pause her or fast forward her. But I think we should reclaim those rhythms and make a big effort, and also encourage the members to make something of that. Maybe there's something there, but that's not the only answer. I think it's part of a much bigger package. Yeah.
Can I add something there, Cas? Peter, are you done?
Yes, I'm done with Cas. Thank you. I think this is this is something that we should really explore further. The whole thing about the rhythms. Now, I think it's very important. This is very helpful. Thank you. Sorry, Etienne.
All the presentations tonight. Yes, Etienne.
I actually want to add to the rhythms, maybe just to add a bit of, at least is very interesting and fascinating, the whole idea of rhythms and cycles. So you know that the thing that keeps us alive is the brain stem, right? So if your brain stem, if somebody says you are brain dead, your brain stem is dead. So it's this thick as your thumb underneath, almost like it's the stem of the brain, and the brain stem it literally keeps us alive. So you can't breathe and have a heart rate without the brainstem. So the brainstem regulates life. It regulates life through breathing, heart rate, loop doop, loop doop, loop doop, loop doop, hunger and thirst cycles, sleep wake cycles. And even your gait, you know, if I have a 50-year-old eyes, I can't really recognize anybody walking to me from far, but I can actually see that's Peter coming to me because he's got a very specific gait, and it's driven by the brainstem. It's all rhythms and cycles. So the brainstem keeps us alive through rhythms and cycles. And the hypothalamus, I mentioned, that's on top of the brainstem, that actually looks at the night and day cycles, for example, and other rhythms, monthly rhythms and so on. It's also therefore part of the brainstem. And it's all about keeping us alive. And it's interesting that it's actually situated between the brain and the body, brain-body system. And it's in sync with so many rhythms and cycles in nature. So your point of rest and the week and all these ancient rhythms that are so critical. If you think about the most ancient rhythms of us just cycling in balls, on a ball around a ball of fire, and there are so many cycles and rhythms in the universe, the universal rhythms that are so way beyond our own understanding, that seemingly has an effect on our system, and the hypothalamus picks it up. So it's quite fascinating how the whole brain body system is so deeply, innately linked with rhythms and cycles and universally around us. So to your point, maybe there's a final word. Even mindfulness training, meditation, praying in silence, the silence. The first thing you need to do is deep breathing, and deep breathing is a rhythm in its own right. And we know that science says you must silence your mind daily for 15 to 20 minutes if you want real wellness. Science tells us that today. Now, that's been an ancient truth, right? An ancient rhythm that we've seemingly lost, as you rightly put it, in our at least in Christianity for a long time, the Western Christianity. But thank God it's coming back, and we have got this understanding of how important it is. So once again, rhythms and cycles, it's so critical to everything.
Fantastic. And I see some new rhythms developing where people almost kind of compensate. I see some people speak about walking as a kind of a new rhythm that you get, where you almost build it because you don't have the old movements anymore. So you make new plans. And I think the creativity, also on a ritual level, that creativity is wonderful. It's part of our survival to do that. Maybe I must quickly see, see we've got loads of answers to the second question. And the second question that I posed was related to what do you do at the moment? I just want to there are so many. I must just try to get to the first one here. Okay, for me, it's that, okay, I think that first one is still somebody that said about what's troubling. Listen to my body's demands, rest when I need it, cry when I want to, and nothing when I feel like that, and just be who I am, and above all, trust God for making me who He wants me to be. Now, I think that's quite important, to just sometimes let go, let it out. You also spoke about it, Marilyn, also about anger, different emotions that we feel. Discipline myself to stop working at night, and me time. Started to take my dogs for a walk. There you have it. That's a rhythm. Panelists, any one of you can at any time come in and comment on what you hear here tonight. Music, choir, singing, and exercise. Silent times with God, realizing that there is a God and it is not me. I scroll down. Exercise and take as many evenings off as I can to watch series with my husband. That's very nice. Alles wat edel is. Text focus ons reeds daarop. Okay, that's great. Personal quiet time, sharing with a close circle, maybe not enough sharing. Speaking to other ministers, knowing that you are not the only one struggling with these challenges. Speaking to other ministers also reminds me that we are all working together in the bigger church to keep the church and faith practices relevant, even though these practices are implemented differently than before. Now, it's quite a mouthful, but also related to what you said about speaking, Marilyn, and also the other insights. Maximize the energy. Oh, that's what you wrote, Etienne. Thanks for that. So everybody can read it, the 5 that you mentioned. Etienne, there's a question. Can you also type the leaks for us?
It has been done, so it's all in there, Cas.
Okay. It's already there. Thanks so much. Appreciate. Disconnecting as far as possible from technology, computers, cell phones, etc., to reconnect on new, deeper ways to God, people closest to me, myself, and to learn new skills and hobbies. That's wonderful. I don't want to miss any. Will the PowerPoint be available afterwards, Marilyn and Peter?
Yeah, we can either send it out or they can contact us if they want the PowerPoint. I don't know which one will be easiest.
If it's okay with you, I think you can send it, both of you, to Bridget, and then they can get it from her. If that's okay with the presenters. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Philippians 4:8, finally, brothers and sisters, keep your thoughts on whatever is right or deserves praise, things that are true, honorable, fair, pure, acceptable, or commendable. It links up with what Etienne also said, energy blockers, that's what you type there. Yes, and somebody commenting, we don't really understand God's intention with Sabbath and with rest. I completely agree. I think we must revisit that theme very strongly in our own day. And somebody agreeing there with him, to rest in rhythms, but the society and other people make it quite difficult for ministers to actually do that. I think I'm maybe at the last one there. Yes. So if any one of you want to comment, and I also invite all the people who are with us tonight, if you want to ask any other questions. I know somebody right in the beginning, Etienne, asked, what is the new resilience? They wanted to know more about that, but that was already more than an hour ago. So if anybody would like to type a question there, you're welcome, or if the panelist wants to comment.
I can make a comment to resilience while we're waiting for more thoughts, Cas. So just to remind ourselves that resilience in its true sense is not tenacity or grit. It's not perseverance, persistence, discipline. Resilience is a innate capacity that makes us complex, adaptive organisms. It enables us to unconsciously, vastly unconsciously, adapt to the ecosystem, the environment, and to ensure that we are still there we adapt despite the environmental changes. And of course, over very long periods of time, we adapt physical in much more structural ways. But over very short periods of time, we need to be able to adapt psychobiological and, of course, mostly psychological. The best example of resilience, and because every single cell in our bodies have resilience, is quite interesting. It's a very simple example. If you go and practice your arm, you take a dumbbell and you go and you say, I'm going to actually practice my bicep, and you exercise the right arm all the time. After a few days and maybe a few weeks of exercise, you see that your right arm became seriously big, and the other one is still small, looks a bit like a crab. But effectively what's happened is that you overcame the challenge of this dumbbell actually pulling you down in gravity, and actually overcame it with your muscles, and your muscle groups learned from it and grew and became better at actually overcoming that challenge. And so this is the best example of how everything in our brain body systems are resilient. We actually overcome a challenge by using prior knowledge, and that knowledge then enables us to, and we solve the problem in front of us, we overcome it. So we need knowledge and innovation and creative thinking. We overcome the challenge, and once we overcome the challenge, we learn from the experience and grow through that, which gives us a better capacity for overcoming a similar challenge. And if it's psychological, it's of dissimilar nature as well, because it's such a complex theme. And that is resilience. And if you think about resilience, you think, and I really thank you for that question, what is the new resilience? It's more a question for me than that resilience remains the same, but what are the new predictors and new things that we need to have in place? What do we need to now cultivate more than ever to build that resilience? And interesting enough, just from a physiological perspective, and I think so much has been said by Marlene and Peter as well, in terms of many important predictors of resilience. From a physiological perspective, we've seen that the two top ones now are exercise duration and exercise diversity, and of course then reducing and then preventing destructive habits. That's from a very physical, from a physiological, psychological perspective.
Excellent. Thank you, Etienne. I think I've personally seen, the ministers over the past year with online liturgies, online preaching, there was an existing excellent knowledge on theology. that helped them, and their resilience took them to go the extra many miles and do what they're doing at the moment. But they were on. Frederik, you joined us. Are you joining the conversation as well?
I would love to if there's time, Cas.
Yes, please. You're
Cas,
most welcome.
there's a comment that really touched me, and that's this colleague who says, I'm a pastor it seems in a congregation where I'm alone, the only pastor, and the council is not understanding the complexities of what I'm going through, and I just want to acknowledge this. What I see on the board is a church leadership who is vulnerable and not afraid to be that. And I think this in itself is a saving grace for us. But I want to acknowledge my brother, and I think we should help each other. We should really care for each other. If possible, be with him or her when nobody understands. Or if my kerkraad, is so, the anxiety is so high that they want to up the performance. So it seems to me our strength would lie in our honesty, in our vulnerability. If that is what we are going to learn in COVID, it is a wonderful, wonderful gift. But it is counterintuitive. I experienced it myself that, especially in the beginning of COVID, I outperformed myself. I just, and maybe this is just a global Sabbath that was announced on us, and it might save the planet, but it might save our souls if we stop fighting COVID, but start to learn with it what it means to rest. I acknowledge my colleague who says he's alone and is struggling. I'm with you.
That's much appreciated. Thank you so much, Frederik, for coming in and saying that. Thank you. Any of the panelists who would like to make a last comment? Thereafter, I'm going to start to wrap it up and we can talk about next week. It seems okay. It seems like we all good. Personally, I think we had a good evening. I was very glad that I could only chair this session and listen to the three of you and also read the chat box. I'm fatigued. I'm very tired at this stage, and this was helpful to me. It was a lot of wisdom. It's very important to just, first of all, better understand the phenomenon. The last session helped a lot with that. This session too, but you've already taken a step forward in bringing some wisdom to the table regarding, okay, so what now? And if I'm not mistaken, that's exactly what we want to unpack much more next week. So we're going to end off tonight, but our third session in this webinar series will be next week, Tuesday at the same time. So 7 o'clock next Tuesday evening, and then we will have the same panelists speaking to us again, and it will be a bit even more practical. So from my side, Bridget, behind the scenes, thanks so much for setting everything up. Frederik and Communitas, we really appreciate. Etienne, once again, Peter, Marilyn, wonderful contributions, and to everybody who joined us, everybody who chatted with us in the chat function. I hope you have a great evening, and I hope you sleep and get some rest. Thanks so much. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Thank you, Gus.
Dankie.